Hello, Milwaukee Bucks fans. Welcome back to Bucks Latest presented by Fan Arch. I'm your host, Dean Simon. Please make sure to leave a comment down below, and also subscribe. We are still very much on the road to 1,000 subscribers, so I would really appreciate if you could hit that big red button down below. Also, if you could turn on post notifications so you could stay up to date and in the know with all the latest episodes and Milwaukee Bucks updates. Would greatly appreciate that as well. All right, so we are still obviously in the pretty much the most dead part of the NBA offseason. So, par for the course, we are going to talk about some more trade concepts, trade proposals that certain writers and outlets have come out with. And while they're not necessarily a bunch of fully fleshed out trade concepts, or at least this first one, this only one isn't. It's still pretty interesting, and I think as unlikely as it might seem in the beginning, maybe when I start talking about it, it could end up being one of the more plausible trade proposals that could surround a guy like Giannis Antetokounmpo going to X team and for X player in return. So this is all to say that the Los Angeles Lakers come into play in this trade proposal from Clutch Points Anthony Irwin, and basically he talks about a potential interest or liking that the Bucks could particularly take in Austin Reeves of the Lakers in a potential deal. And of course, Reeves' contract is pretty cheap right now. I believe he'll be a free agent maybe next year, I believe, but right now he's on about a 13 or $14 million annual contract. So you would need to package Austin Reeves with guys like Rui Hachimura, the expiring contracts of a Gabe Vincent or a Maxi Kleba or a Jared Vanderbilt, something like that to get a deal across the finish line financially. But of course, Austin Reeves would be the main draw of that deal, and with draft capital involved as well. But Anthony Irwin said, and I quote, "It's almost a surefire thing that if the Lakers and say the Bucks get into trade negotiations for Giannis, the first name in terms of players that Milwaukee is going to ask about is Reeves." And that completely makes sense from, if we're going to get into the hypothetical of whether the or of if the Bucks and Lakers were going to get into actual discussions about a trade centered around Giannis, Austin Reeves would be the likely guy to end up going back to Milwaukee to kind of highlight the package going back to the Bucks, because he truly did burst onto the scene as a fringe all-star for the Lakers this past year. And it certainly wasn't a fluke. He also had a couple of games where LeBron and then of course Luca, after he got there when they weren't playing, and Austin Reeves carried them to wins and had 30 plus point like triple doubles. And he really became an actual star scorer and facilitator for Los Angeles, and he's going to eventually outgrow his role next to Luca. And I shouldn't say outgrow his role, because it's not like he's going to turn into an MVP candidate and then he'll be too good for the Lakers. It's just that his play style along with Luca just doesn't really make sense for the Lakers' future, because they don't need two guys that are really that crave the ball and can only be effective in pick and roll and operating for their own selves on the offensive end, and to get guys the ball. Truthfully, they just don't need two on ball scorers and playmakers that do a lot of the same things, even though it's in very different fashions and in different ways. And Austin Reeves, if he were to be given a chance to, let's say, go to Milwaukee, and of course, this is completely hypothetical in the post Giannis future, Austin Reeves would become the Milwaukee Bucks main star, and he could probably blossom into, I don't want to say a perennial all-star, but surely based on this past year, again, alongside LeBron and then alongside Luca for half the year, you could see that him putting up 25 and 5 on pretty decent efficiency with those guys next to him, you could see him eventually having the stats, the numbers year in and year out to become a perennial all-star type of player in the Eastern Conference for a Bucks team that wouldn't have Giannis. All of this is just kind of crazy hypothetical, but aside from trade packages that I really like, and surely that I wouldn't take at this moment for Giannis, but if the Bucks were forced to deal him, there are packages, let's say from the Detroit Pistons, involving guys like Jaden Ivey and Ron Holland, maybe Asar Thompson if they were to ever give him up. Those are the kinds of deals that I like. And obviously the Spurs and their war chest of young players and draft capital. But other than that, the Lakers would be a team that can offer a star caliber player like decent first round draft capital, nothing really crazy, but then just money that will be expiring that that you can make supplementary or complementary moves with. So I don't hate the idea of if the Bucks were going to get in contact with the Lakers about potentially pairing Luca and Giannis together in the future, that Austin Reeves would be coming uh, back to Milwaukee on the other end of that deal. But it's just the fact of that Austin Reeves is going to be paid pretty soon. And will Austin Reeves, will he have that same, will he be as attractive if he comes with, let's say, a $30 million plus price tag annually? That's kind of where things get a little bit tricky. But we've spent long enough on this topic for a hypothetical. We'll move on to something that is a little bit more pertinent and more real, and that's whether Jericho Sims will actually be heavily, well, not heavily involved, but involved to a degree in the Bucks rotation in 2025-26. And Fansided's Dalton Sell basically came out with a piece saying that Jericho Sims, while he's not going to have the most impact on the Bucks' success, or at least the Bucks' front court success, that he can be a guy at the very least that is able to give Giannis a break. Because what the Milwaukee Bucks will have to do this coming year is that they'll have to obviously play Giannis as much as they possibly can, and he'll have to stay healthy for them to even have a shot at landing a favorable position in the playoff standings. But you're going to need to give him breaks eventually, and Jericho Sims is a don't want to say a perfect guy because he certainly has his flaws, especially on the offensive end, but he really is a great energy guy that can come in and plug in, take up some minutes in the Bucks front court for when Giannis eventually exits the game, when Myles Turner exits the game. And Dalton Sell said, and I quote, "The Milwaukee Bucks cannot afford to wear out their star by the end of the year if they want to make any noise in the NBA playoffs. Again, Sims isn't a game changer, but he can be a nice rotational fill in when called upon. He's young, athletic, and energetic, which fuels him as a tough rebounder, defender, and lob threat." And Dalton Sell goes on to say more about Jericho Sims, but uh, truth be told, he really, really impressed me this past year, again, in very limited time, but he remained efficient. He was a great shot blocker, and even if he wasn't blocking shots, he was great at deterring a lot of shots around the rim and then immediately grabbing a rebound, getting out in transition. Did show a little bit as a transition ball handler to a degree, even though that's not his forte at all. But of course he's just a uber athletic, one of probably pound for pound the most athletic, not just big men, but players in the NBA in general. And he's a guy that can block shots and catch lobs and really get out on the break for a Bucks team that's what they're going to be looking to do this next year. So Jericho Sims could really graduate to having a huge role in this rotation if he can improve substantially on the offensive end outside of just jumping vertically in the air and catching lobs. If he can add a little bit more touch, if he can be a little bit more patient and I don't know, just develop more of a handle. But these aren't things that he should necessarily be focusing on too much. That it shouldn't really take away from his more important aspects of his game. But if he can just become a little bit more polished of a player in general, that could do great things for the Bucks rotation this year, and of course the Bucks front, not front office, front court. But speaking of the Bucks rotation, there was a pretty interesting updates that they came out from, or prediction, I should say, from NBA writer for Forbes, Brian Sampson, who came out with an article detailing the thought process that's going into his prediction for the Bucks starting lineup, I guess on opening night. And the conclusion that he came to, I won't keep you waiting. Basically, the starting backcourt for the Milwaukee Bucks, I guess, on opening night is going to be, according to Brian Sampson, Ryan Rollins and AJ Green, with Gary Trent Jr. starting at the small forward, and then Giannis and Myles Turner in the front court. So immediately, what comes to mind is, why does Ryan Rollins graduate to the starting lineup already over a guy like Kevin Porter Jr., who, while Ryan Rollins proved a lot this past year, it certainly isn't enough to warrant jumping into the starting lineup on day one of this new season. And Brian Sampson talked a little bit during his story about Ryan Rollins and of course the defensive impact and all these kinds of things. But in my humble opinion, you got to give it at least 15 to 20 games this year to really, really see if he can prove something to you that he's going to remain a consistent option on the offensive end, if he's going to become a more polished playmaker, especially in pick and roll and in tandems with guys like Giannis, like Myles Turner. Will he develop good chemistry with them full time and make that a consistent thing? Of course, we know the defensive potential that Ryan Rollins has, and that's what really could leapfrog him over a guy like Kevin Porter Jr. And I guess for this story or this prediction, just as a one off thing, I guess Cole Anthony is just completely being passed up and considered as strictly a bench scoring option that won't really get the chance to start, and that they're going to really rely on his offense coming off the bench, which I don't have any problem with. But Ryan Rollins gets the push over Kevin Porter Jr. in this. And then AJ Green starting at the shooting guard, of course, pushing Kyle Kuzma to the bench with Gary Trent Jr. starting at the small forward. And Gary Trent Jr. should be starting on day one for this team, should be starting the entire year, because I believe outside of Myles Turner, while a lot of people will say that Myles Turner is going to be the second option for this team, it in terms of just a straight up scoring perspective, Gary Trent Jr. outside of Giannis, he was going to be one of, if not the most trusted name outside of maybe let's say Bobby Portis, and then maybe KPJ if he can become more consistent. No one will really be relied upon more outside of, again, Bobby Portis than Gary Trent Jr. to put the ball in the basket. So I don't really have any problem with GTJ starting at the three. He's shown that he's been able to do it. He can keep up with small forwards. He can transition to a more wing oriented style of play if he really needed to. But Ryan Rollins and AJ Green being the starting backcourt, it's a little bit questionable. I will say that. But anyways, we will finish this thing off with a little update from ESPN's Tim McMahon saying that basically Giannis is not going anywhere, and that if he were to have requested a trade or something, it should have been this past summer. He said, and I quote, "Speculation has swirled around Antetokounmpo asking out of Milwaukee for several years, as we all know. If he didn't take that drastic step in the summer, it's unlikely to happen mid-season." And this is something that we've covered in previous episodes, that if Giannis wasn't eventually going to completely put his foot down and request that trade for this past summer, that it probably wouldn't happen. And not that it wouldn't ever happen, but that it would be a long while before we even see the headline saying that Giannis's camp or Giannis are thinking about an exit from the team, exploring his options and things like that. And again, while this is something that we knew, it's just nice to see kind of the national media really stamping this and kind of putting their foot down in this perspective, really reporting that if Giannis were to have done it, it would have been through the summer, and that we can probably look towards the trade deadline this year as being a period of time that's considered somewhat safe in terms of Giannis trade rumors and the whole trade saga. It seems like nothing's really going to be unfolding like that, but maybe unless the Bucks get off to a 10-31 start through the first half of the regular season, maybe if things go on just a complete downward spiral, maybe we start to see things like that a little bit earlier than we can anticipate. But all of that will remain to be seen. Regardless, though, I'm still very excited to get into the season very, very soon. But anyways, that'll be it for me today. Thank you very much for tuning in for another episode of Bucks Latest. I really appreciate it. If you could hit that big red subscribe button down below, again, still on the road to 1,000 subscribers, I would appreciate that as well. Leave a like, tell me what you think about these segments in the comments, and I will see you guys in the next one. Go Bucks.